Thank you very much. I will say, if your vision is obscured for any reason, you can move into some of the front seats. It will give you a better view of all of us. My name is Felicia Asiedu, as you just heard. I was asked to give an audio description of myself, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. So for those of you that are vision impaired, I am a black female wearing a green and blue kind of black checked blazer, sitting with my lovely heels on. It would be a sight to see, let me tell you. I'm going to hand over to Ryan.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. So my name's Ryan Curtis Johnson. I am Director of Comms at the Valuable 500. Just to give an audio description of myself, a visual description, I've got brown hair, I've got slight bags under my eyes because I have 2 under 7-year-olds, and I am white, and I'm wearing a double-breasted blazer with a roll neck that's like a light brown, beige colour, and some dark navy jeans. I'm also wearing some awesome Cuban heels, which I'm really proud of. I'm rocking that. And that's me, I think, in a nutshell.
Looking fantastic, of course. My name's Jen Bray, and I work for First. I'm the event tech team lead there. I'm a white female. I've got long, kind of dark hair, I suppose. I'm wearing a green khaki suit with trainers. I think maybe my footwear's not quite as fantastic as these guys. And I have been at First for 4 months and always worked in event tech. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start by saying a few things. We've got 45 minutes. We don't want to spend the whole 45 minutes necessarily talking, but we will if we are called to, because we can do that. We're all quite good at talking. But what we'd really like you to do is be able to ask your questions throughout, and you will see a link come on screen at certain points throughout the conversation, and you can use that link to ask questions on your phone. I encourage it because we'd rather have a conversation that is inclusive and is shared amongst us so that we can answer your questions throughout. And we're not going to wait to the end to do that, so please do feel empowered to do so. Now, I work for Cvent. We're in technology, but I also run a company called the Diverse Speaker Bureau, which somewhat helps me to feel more qualified to talk about things like diversity and inclusivity. I've run a couple of big community conversations where we come together and have honest, open, no holds barred conversations about the challenges that we all face from an inclusivity perspective. And those have been amazing because people have said things that they thought they couldn't say. And we've all been like, it's fine, just ask the question, just say it, feel free, because that's the only way we get to share and learn. And when we had our kind of pre-chat, we were like, oh yeah, no, that's really interesting. So we're just going to have that kind of level of honesty on stage. They're going to say some things that you'll want to throw stuff at them for. It's fine, you do that, just feel free. It's a very open space. Are you all right with that?
Yeah, totally.
Great. So with that in mind, I'm just going to get started with you, Ryan. So I want to start with, you were basically talking to us about the word you used the word normalize and then said you hate it.
Yeah.
But you were talking to us about the normalization of things at events. And could you just explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's really easy for us to become quite, not think things through. And I think sometimes that can really be detrimental to the individual. So let's break it down in a really simple way. 15% of the population have a disability of some form, whether that's visible or non-visible, whether that means they're a carer. They have an outgoing, which is an expenditure of around about 13 trillion. That's how much money. And if you look at most businesses, they will often forget or think of a disability as an afterthought. And I think, in some ways, the event industry is sometimes also a person that thinks about that. And I can tell you fundamentally where it goes wrong. And it's a really simple process. And when I talk to people, we've got one of the largest CEO network. That's the likes of Apple, Google, we've got EY, the various Coles Group, we've got Lloyds Banking Group, all from various different sectors, all doing lots of different things, Burberry as well. And the key fundamental to all of this is where it's always seen as an issue when it comes to accessibility, especially with events, is cost. So the reason why you won't have live captioning, which is clear text, and you'll go for a different version is because it's slightly cheaper. But also as well, no one's asked for it. So because no one asked for it, you're not going to provide it. And this is what I was saying to both Jen and Felicia, is the fact that we have to normalise this. So you cannot jeopardise or penalise someone because they have a disability. You can't put a cost on that. So just because that person is visually impaired or neurodiverse, or may not be able to take information in as quickly as they like, they might prefer to read it, doesn't mean that we should then jeopardise that because it costs an extra £400, £500, whatever that might be to make it accessible. And also as well, when does it become the responsibility of the person with the disability to come and disclose that information? So you then put the onus on the person. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not calling out the events industry here. I'm not saying. What I'm asking is to just add it into your best practice. So best practice is that it is fully accessible. So at the Valuable 500, we only talk on panels if we know it's fully accessible. And we often get pushback, but no one's come forward and asked. I don't care. If that person then turns up and they want to come and involve themselves or experience, they're not going to be kind of turned away or not have that. And I think that's the most important find in this, is when I try and say, and I hate the word normalise, because what is normal anyway, but the key to it is how do we just make it best practice? How do we do it so it just is part of the cycle? So it's not an afterthought, so it's not, oh, didn't think about that. Well, why? Because these individuals, whether it's visible or non-visible, have been penalised their whole life. And that is where we need to change this mindset. We need to change it so that it's part of the granular, the planning part of when you're putting on any event, so that everybody feels included. And you know what, I was just talking to Jen, I was writing something before I came here, and our founder, Caroline Casey, she's registered blind. She hid her disability for many years. She won't mind me saying that either. But her key is we've got to stop saying about disability inclusion. What we need to start saying is, if you design and you include business disability and you include that within your business strategy and your business way, one is that makes it accessible and gives access to the disability, but actually it just makes it accessible and inclusive for all. And so, like, trying to take away that segregation, which I think is really hard, because like anything, when you're trying to get something over the line, you want to name it, you need to get it to make people not feel so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you said that I could touch on, but, you know, you've landed on that point of by design, and if you do it by design, it should normalise it. But I think one of the challenges, and we experienced this recently when we were talking about diversity, of different types of diversities, they all get kind of lumped together.
Yeah.
And that can be a challenge, because when you lump all the different types of diversities together in order to become more inclusive, you then sort of fall into the category of, well, are you trying to address me, or like, what is it you're actually trying to solve for now? And I remember I was saying, you know, we had some feedback that as a black woman, one of the ladies was saying at our community conversation, I almost feel like you just lump it all together. You're like, well, as a black woman, we're going to try and make it accessible for you, just as we would for the disabled people. And we're like, what sense does that make? You know, what kind of access is it you think you're trying to give me that you can just lump me together with a whole other group of people?
Yeah.
And I think that does make it challenging. I mean, Jen, I would pass that over to you to get your view. How hard do you think it is for event organisers to really tackle the challenges maybe that are faced by, you know, us needing to normalise the inclusivity?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. Let's not sugar the pill. It's really hard to get that right. I'm thinking back to one of our largest events after the pandemic, and we went back physical, and we were, you know, very aware of this conversation. It's very prevalent at the minute, as it should be. And trying to get that right, trying to get that text right for the attendees, we ended up going through lots of iterations and trying to get to a point where we were making sure we had everyone covered. But then, what if we're leaving someone out and they're saying they've forgotten about me? That's not how you want someone to feel. So how can you get that right? I think it's about putting yourself out there and saying, we want to have a conversation with you about this. Tell us what you need, and we'll help you. You don't have to tell us what's going on with you. You don't have to disclose any personal information, but tell us what you need and we'll deliver that for you. I think that's a good place to start. Let's open the conversation and be willing to make some changes and, you know, do what we can for people. That's the only way that we learn. So making sure those people feel included in the conversation, I think, at the start. I think Ryan also said something really interesting about, you know, pay the money. who is the expert, who are the experts in this arena, and don't just go and ask people and expect them to say, oh, well, I need you to do this, this, and this. It's about saying, we're going to do this, this, and this in order to help you. Does that help?
Yeah.
Are we doing something else? Pay the people to get that advice,
Yeah.
to get the right advice on how to make that inclusive for everyone.
And I think that's a really interesting point there, because then it comes back, and this is like a whole other area that you're trying to go in. And, you know, it can sometimes, what you're saying there, you'll feel like you're trying to fight all these different things to kind of get that change. And unfortunately, yeah, it is a bit like that. And we have to be aware that it is a bit like that. But what's really important is the lack of representation. So actually the people that are planning the event, or the people who are making the decisions, do they have the experience? Do they have the lived experience? Do you ask? Do you actually ask? And, you know, fundamentally, the biggest problem when it comes to disability is there is no data. People in organisations don't feel confident enough to come forward and say, I have a disability, because they automatically think it will have a negative impact on them. It will stall their career chances. It will make them miss out on things. And I think fundamentally, like what you were saying with the tech and the various different things, let's not forget, 2 years ago, when COVID first started, 15 days it took for most businesses to turn their business online and become virtual. 15 days. That means within 15 days, most businesses became more accessible than they had ever been in their whole entire kind of journey of being a business. And then after that 2 years, some of them still didn't learn. Because the next thing was, well, we may have given you that freedom. Yeah, you could have worked from your front room, your bedroom, whatever that was, but now you need to come in. And so then you isolate again. So you've kind of given it, and then you've ripped it apart. And I think that's where it's about, you know, you push the tech and it's worked really beautifully, and then it's about using the tech to make sure that it's still utilised, to be flexible, and not sort of just say it because the world, we were all in the same sort of space. And that, we always say at the Valuable 500 that actually the pandemic really helped to kind of put us all in the same circular sort of place. Everyone was experienced that shut off, that stay at home, whether we liked it or not. But actually it all put us to all have something in common for a change. And that's what helped to drive lots of different things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I'm going to carry on my questions, but I can see some coming in. And like I said, I want this to be a two-way dialogue, so I'm going to ask some of those now. I can see a question that says, do you think event organisers are more conscious of accessibility now, or do you think it's only those that focus on diversity and inclusion? Which is a really good question. I know I'm a moderator, so I'm not supposed to answer questions, so I'll let it go that way first. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we're getting there. I think we need to be more conscious of it, and how can we be more open about it and not making assumptions. Like, we talked a lot about, you know, what do people need, and you don't necessarily need to tell me, disclose your personal details, but what do you need from it? What do you need? But how can we suggest things first? How can we say, well, you can actually access this through, you know, through whatever ways, and describe that in not just a way of you can get the train or you can get a taxi to drop you outside kind of thing. There's a lot more to it than that.
Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's not good enough now to say. I think it's more about action. So most businesses could probably say, we are accessible, we are inclusive, we do all of those things. And I think a lot of people got caught out, you know. And let's be honest, where this all started, this movement of where people have pushed and change has happened, it all started from the Black Lives Matter movement. And we can't not ignore the fact that the world woke up a little bit and actually started to sort of be a bit more vocal. Businesses were being caught out because they were saying they were supporters, but actually what were they doing to support those sort of things? And I think that's what this is. The proof is in your action. So inclusion means action. I'm quoting now a hashtag that's coming out. So next month is, on the 3rd of December, is International Day of People with Disabilities. And the hashtag to that is inclusion means action. And if we really want to do stuff, it's about making action. And it's like what you said, it's every detail to that. So it's about how that person gets to your event. It's how the stuff you send out. Is your PDF accessible? I mean, I know that sounds bizarre, but most things, and you know, Microsoft is a member of ours, one of our iconics. They have worked so hard to implement a lot of accessibility, even within Word and, you know, Adobe PDFs and Word documents, stuff like that, there's a little button that says how accessible this document is, whether that's from the way in which your text is laid out, whether it's the design, the look. But again, going back to what you said, go and ask the people that are, well equipped and understood and knowledgeable of that. It's okay to ask for help. The same as it's okay to say, we are doing it, but we're not doing enough. We're still working on it. And everyone's allowed to be on a journey. I just think you have to be careful when we say that. And we talked about that on our call. How long does that journey last? How long can you spin that line? 5 years later, you cannot still be on that journey. You need to be showing. And I think if we were a little bit more open and, diversity and inclusion, I always think those two words are a little bit funny for people because they either feel completely comfortable with calling it out and saying it, or they're really uncomfortable, and so they tiptoe around some of the words, but they wouldn't want to say some of the things.
I completely agree. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about our community conversations we've been having at Cvent. We're a technology provider at the end of the day, so we can say, well, in the registration process, make sure, you're making sure that you ask people the right questions and, put that in the reg, and the reg is ultimately on you, but we're beyond that now. We're like, okay, so you've sorted that registration piece out, but what are you doing? What conversations are you having around that? What are you actually going to change based on what you captured during your registration? And that's why we're having those conversations. And you mentioned, since the Black Lives Matter movement, everything kicked up and everyone's like, oh, diversity and inclusion. I actually don't think people genuinely understand what those words mean. At the Diverse Speaker Bureau and with my business partner, Gabby, we always talk about the fact that diversity is kind of a bit of a box-ticking exercise. It's that numbers game that you're playing. How many do I have? How many have I? How many people am I accommodating? And that's really the diversity angle. The inclusion is what we should be striving for, which is why we're having this conversation, because it's about the feeling. It's about do I feel comfortable to come to that event? Do I feel like I can be me if I come to that event and not have someone have to kind of overly support me or help me? I remember there was a speaker that was going to come to one of our events, and she's a wheelchair user. And I said to her, we're trying to ensure that the ramp access to the stage is accessible for you. I said, if you need some support with the ramp, as in if it's okay, but the gradient's not quite right and someone supports you, is that okay? And she said, absolutely not. My wheelchair is my power. Some people might think my wheelchair is my hindrance, but that's my power. That's how I get around. I decide where I want to go, and I decide when I want to move, and that is who I am. That's my power. So if your event allows me to be me and have all the power at my fingertips, and I can move myself, you've done a good job. If not, if someone has to suddenly accommodate me and then really you've ticked your diversity box because you got her on stage and she did that number ticking exercise, but you really didn't enable her to be herself at your event. And I thought that was so cool.
That's so important. I always talk about, I've recently done some research just in the travel world, and by all means, I was saying the event industry needs to sort of step up, but the travel industry is just as far. It's very archaic when you look at some of those things. Don't even get me started with planes. The amount of stuff I could tell you about planes is insane. But the reason for that is the fact that you need to make that individual feel like you genuinely cared, and rather than, the shock factor. And I always talk about it from a digital perspective, and hopefully this makes sense. This is how I work out in my head. When you look at building a website of some sort, you track every way you want that individual to interact. And you probably do that with your registration forms and everything like that. You've got the workflows of how that works. No one ever considers the workflow of what it is in the real life. So when a person turns up with a disability and hasn't disclosed to you, 9 times out of 10, the person is greeted with because we don't know how to deal with that. And that's where we're sort of saying, build that knowledge, do that training, get people to come into your organisations. When that individual turns up, they don't feel like you haven't thought about them. They don't feel like they're now sort of going to be dealt with in a really panicked sense. It's like, we need to make it so that it's part of the function, so that people know how to deliver, to deal, to interact, to speak. Ask the question. You can always ask how people, and there's some really key ways of doing those sort of things that really just help. People with disabilities, whether they're visible or non-visible, they're still human beings. And so if we kind of keep, I know it feels like tick boxing or segregation, and keep keeping them over here and they're not fully integrated here, they will always be a tick box. The same as diversity will always be a tick box if we don't integrate it in part of the full circle or wheel of whatever business is trying to achieve.
Yeah. I'm going to get to a question that's now so far down the screen, I might have to stand up, so I'm going to stand. It says, events are stressful. Mental health, understanding. Mental health is a key issue in our industry. How can we be more inclusive to those attendees or organisers who are combating mental health problems, which can be classed as a disability? That's a really good question. I'm really glad it was upvoted, got 5 thumbs up, and I know we've spoken about that in terms of mental health. So, Jen, I'll start with you. How can we be more inclusive for those that are struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I am someone who struggled with my mental health. Certainly the pandemic, I would say, had a negative effect on that. Being at home with my children was not always enjoyable, let's be honest. And coming back to work is scary. Going back and being out there with people and you think, do I know what I'm doing? I haven't done this for a long time. Do I know how to do this still? And that's quite frightening. I now take medication to help with this, and that's why I'm here today, because I can, say thanks for that medication helping me out. I don't know if there's an obvious way to solve this. The only thing that helps me is to talk and to be around other people and be aware of things that I find triggering and things that I find, when I'm stressed, my mental health takes a back seat. I don't look after myself. And I can see that in other people now. One of my things that I always speak to the team, and I speak to my team all the time and say, are you okay? Is everything all right? Tell me honestly, are you okay? Because I want to know. And often we'll have a very short period of time spent on that, or we might have a bit longer talking about if you're okay and what did you do at the weekend and did you get enough sleep, and I can see that you're working at long hours. Why are you doing that? What can I do to help you? How can I support you? Having an open dialogue like that with your team and your colleagues is really, really important, and that's something that helped me. Certainly I was very, very scared to talk about how I felt. But once I'd opened up, I found that my team was so incredibly supportive to me and really looked after me. My boss, I was very lucky at the time, my boss was fantastically supportive and then continued to be for the duration. I felt like I could always go and be open. I would just encourage you to talk to people. If you can find one trusted person, then speak to them, and as soon as you open up, it will just feel so much lighter, it will feel so much easier. I think that we all have a responsibility to be looking after each other. And I know we've talked about, being open with people and saying, tell me what you need and tell me what I can do to help you. You don't have to tell me why, but I can be there for you. And that's the same with mental health, I think. It's really important to me to just have that open dialogue with people and be supporting people and making sure that, you have a think about that. Can you provide a room that's quiet for people to go to, and someone comes to you and says, I'm often on the registration desk and, I'm very loud and outgoing, but I might need to go and have 5 minutes in a room. And what if someone comes to you and says, oh God, I've just messed up on this, or I'm feeling really stressed, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Have you got that room that you can say, come on, let's go and have a sit down. Let me get you a cup of tea, classic British response to someone being a bit upset, a cup of nice sweet tea. Or can I go and get you, let's go and have a break. Let's go and walk around outside or whatever and take some deep breaths, thinking about that. It doesn't matter. I always say events are, we're not saving lives here. Maybe at the vet show across the aisle they are. But certainly we're not saving lives. It's just events. People come and listen to a bit of a session and hopefully take something away from it, and they have a sandwich and then they go home. Put it in perspective, your mental health and your well-being is so much more important.
I think it's really important. I also suffer with my mental health, and you have to understand people are sometimes comfortable disclosing it and sometimes people are not. Really interesting, I want to pick up on the last part of that. Some people don't like to see it as a disability. I always think mental health is a really different one, in the sense of it's actually quite fashionable for businesses to say we're really into mental health. We've provided a yoga session for you. We really feel it's really important. Let's be honest, in the events industry, being an event manager is probably one of the most stressful jobs. It's the highest rate of burnout. So actually, if we really want to make it not acceptable, but really make it so that it's part of the makeup within the event industry, because it's got a high proportion of people burning out and suffering with mental health, what is it that the businesses you work for or the places that you work for are doing in supporting that? And that's the key to it. And also as well, it's really hard to try and keep that segregation, because a lot of people talk about mental health over here and disability over here. It is part of a disability, and we want to make it inclusive, and we want to make it so that all disabilities are dealt with in the same way. But I always kind of go back to our co-founder again, Caroline Casey. This isn't the a la carte menu we're after. We're not going through disability and saying, right, this month and this year we're going to deal with mental health, neurodiversity. Okay, we'll deal with also some of these others as well. It's all of them. So when you look at disability and you want to make that, again, it's like everything we keep saying, you need to make it part of the genetic of your business. You need to make it part of your company way of working. If we care about our people and we genuinely care, then they will use the services or options that you have, but you cannot force it upon them. You cannot force it upon the individual to come forward and tell you they have a disability. You should be able to see. And I think it's also about being a bit empathetic. We're not machines, we are human beings, and we are delicate, and we've been through some sort of, in an element of crisis. The pandemic has been hard on everyone in their own way, and we have to look at it in all those ways. I always remember during that time, there was a slight imbalance, wasn't there? Because those who had children, I've got 2 children, and those who didn't have children, it felt like more were taking the slack because the other ones were having to homeschool and stuff like that. And that sort of like difference in, it was harder for them than it was for you. It isn't. And everyone's mental health is individual to that person, same with their disability. So the key is making sure you've got the plans and the process, you have looked at it, you are considering it, but it's not just the one. It's all. It's about disability as a whole.
Yeah, indeed. And I know that, I see some questions down here about, is there a central resource or standards that can be followed or access? And I see also it says, what have you found to be the most obvious language in terms of change and to be more inclusive? I think that first one, it can be tricky. I think you mentioned it earlier about just pay the money and access the companies that do this. I mean, like I said, one of my business partners, Gabby Austin Brown, she runs sessions for all businesses. There are so many of these consultants that, you can invite into your organization to help you understand at every single level, because that's what's also important. You often find that there's this nice grassroots thing that happens in organizations, and then those grassroots teams are like, okay, well, since you think it's important, can you run it? Can you deal with it? Can you not get paid for it and add it on top of your workload? Because that would be really cool. Whereas the seniors are not really doing much. So that's not a good thing. So you kind of want people to come into your business and educate at every level so they understand, what impact is this going to have? And ultimately, though it is a cost, your bottom line is going to be improved because you extend your audience. Quite frankly, you reach many more people, and then you can sell to those people. So it's a win-win, really.
Yeah, and also as well, we have to be realistic. The next generation, when I say this, I'm not isolating or pointing fingers, but the next generation of event people are not going to work the way that other generations have worked. There is a clear definition, and that is why change is coming, because they are not going to sit there and say, yes, I will work 14 hours, 16-hour days, because my mental health or my life is more important. And I think if businesses can start to be a bit more respectful and understand that, change the model. It's about changing the world. The design of it is not inclusive. It's an ableist way, the way in which the world has been built. That is not, down to anyone, but the fact that the people around the table that were deciding the things didn't understand. And that's why we need to remodel, we need to relook at it and do the changes. And that's absolutely fine to do that. And you have to be able to really be willing to step up and change that. I guess one of the questions about the resources, I would say if any of you work within the events industry and you have clients, on the Valuable 500 website, you can see all of our members. So you can type in any of the brands that you're working for, and then if they're pushing back about accessibility and they're a member of the Valuable 500, their CEO has done a wet signature to say they will drive disability inclusion within their workplace. So that's a really easy way, I think, of really pushing back to the brands to sort of say, well, hang on a sec, you're a member of the Valuable 500. Your CEO has signed the disclaimer that they want to drive and push that forward. So that's a really good way of looking at it. But I think, again, pay for the experts, pay for the people that know their stuff when it comes to disability, when it comes to, you know, skills, knowledge, all of those things, and go and educate yourself. More than anything, don't expect others to teach you. Go and find yourself.
Yeah, and on the standards, we were speaking, and I'll ask you this question, about speakers as well, about ensuring that it's inclusive as a speaker panel, but also that your speakers feel that I have what I need. I'll give a quick example. I remember there was a lady we were going to work with, and she was going to speak at one of our events, and she said, I have to tell you, I'm dyslexic. And I was like, okay, good knowledge. And, I think us growing up, we hear, there are people that are dyslexic, but we never really take it that seriously. And over my years, I've learned that there are different levels of dyslexia, and that will prohibit certain things, or you need additional things. And she said, all I need is a whiteboard and a pen, a marker. And that's all she wanted. And I felt so happy that she disclosed that to us. But she said, this screen thing and the PowerPoints and the clicking, it's just not going to work for me. I just want simple whiteboard and a marker. And how easy was that? And then she felt that she could deliver that session quite happily. And she said, if I'd had to make a PowerPoint, I probably wouldn't have done your show. And how is that, And so it makes me think about things like DICE, that you can go and research. If no one's heard about DICE, please go and look at DICE. It is a way to ensure that your speaker panels and your events are as diverse and inclusive as they can be. And there are lots of different points that you don't want to checkbox, but you can just adhere to and say, yes, I've done this. Yes, I've done this. And at the end of it, if you do very well, your events get DICE accredited. So you either get DICE accredited, you get DICE certified, or no DICE. And no DICE is that you didn't manage this at all. So Jen, I'll throw this one over to you. In terms of language and having that conversation, that communication, what is the most obvious language you think we can change or avoid in order to make it more inclusive?
I think it's really important that you're not gendering people, first of all, that you're saying good morning everyone, hello everyone, and you're not including their title. Dear Mr. Smith, dear Mrs. Smith, how do you know that that's what they want to be called? How can you be more inclusive from that perspective? I think it's also, I read something recently that was about not assuming that someone's married to a man or a woman and saying, have you got a partner? Asking about their partner. You don't need to say, are you married? I happen to be married to a man who is a Scouser and who is very manly. But I might be married to a woman. It doesn't matter. So I would prefer that you said to me, have you got a partner? Or, who's at home with you? And someone might not want to talk about that. But just making sure that you're not gendering people. I also think there's something around questioning whether you need to store someone's title in your registration data. Do you need Mr. and Mrs.? No, you don't need to know that. Do you need to ask their gender on a registration website? And if you are asking that, and if you think that you're getting pushback, I would always question why. Why do you need that information? There might be a valid reason, which is fine, but you need to consider then what you're putting on that registration site and making sure that it encompasses everything. If you don't know about the 9 unique characteristics, then go and learn about that and see how that can help you draft your communications. Make sure that your speakers are briefed to be aware of good morning everybody, or something similar to that, making sure that they're not saying ladies and gentlemen. That's just it puts shivers down my spine when people say that now.
I guess what I'm taking from what you're saying is it's assumptions. It's not even necessarily the gender assumptions, but it's all the assumptions that one would make with their language. It's about thinking twice about it. I think I was saying something the other day about idioms as well, where, trying to remove the use of idioms. And if one doesn't know what I mean by that, like if I say, oh, cat's got your tongue, some people understand that, some people won't. And it's hard to translate. So I know we use translation services into German and Spanish. If I say things like, "Oh, cat's got your tongue," suddenly people are like, "What are they saying? They're talking about cats all of a sudden," you know.
It's really hard, that. I also think as well, just own it as well sometimes. Sometimes you might say something, and if you try and so, you know, I'm sitting here now and I said the word insane, and I want to apologise for saying that, but that's a word that I've said. And I just, you know, you've got to start sort of owning it, thinking, you know, I didn't really need to use that word. That was just me not thinking it. But I've owned it now, and I've just kind of gone back and I've caveated the fact that I shouldn't have used that word. That was silly of me. But I also really like, sorry, I'm just seeing these questions just as I can see them. How can we move this conversation back end as well? As a visually impaired professional working in events, there's still a lot of tech and processes that I struggle with, so it needs addressing on both ends as well.
I was looking at that one earlier. As a technology provider, we've got lots happening in that section, but go for it.
I just love that. I always think a really way of saying it, and I've been doing it recently with trying to call the travel industry out, is positive aggression. You know, we all like to do, as a typical British thing, to be very polite about it, not to rock the boat. But I think you can be positive aggressive in a challenging way to get things over the line. And I think if that individual was to kind of address it, I mean, it's about calling it out. You know, if you are going to an event and you're finding that hard, what other options do they have? Do they have an option to allow you to go into a different room to do networking online and then rejoin the live element of the event so you could do that yourself? Is there a way in which they could close it off so it's smaller groups? I mean, you have to ask, and you should really push the owners back onto them. They may not have thought about it, and that's an opportunity to kind of push that. I still believe, though, I'm caveating that and kind of contradicting myself, the onus shouldn't be on you. There's lots of different things, and I'm sure you can add to what there is. There are solutions out there. It's about just utilising them and thinking about the process of them.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this now before anyone says, "What was she saying up there?" As a technology provider, we have lots of developers and product marketers and product specialists, and I'm not one of them. I do not work in the developer sector or anything like that. I am a marketer. But one of the things I am super passionate about things like diversity, inclusion, sustainability, and I'm always asking my counterparts, especially in America, what are you doing about that? What are you doing about that? So when it comes to our back end, I'm just going to read a little Slack I got the other day, and if anyone understands this, well done, because I certainly didn't, but I was like, I want to be part of that. And he said, "You'll be really happy to know about this because you're particularly interested in accessibility, so I'm going to send this to you." And I was like, great. He said, "We have an announcement that we have voluntary product accessibility templates that explain how information and technology products, such as software, meet the WCAG standards." And I know the WCAG standards are the Web Content and Accessibility Guideline standards. And he sent this to me because he was saying how we're building our technology from the back is ensuring that it meets the accessibility standards on the front for the people that are going to use the web products. And I was like, excellent, this is great. At least you're thinking about it, but not thinking about it from a very kind of soft side of things, not just kind of saying, oh, we made that text yellow because actually yellow text on a black background is much better. They're like all the way from the bottom up. We're making sure that we're developing our technology in such a way that it's going to be accessible for all the users, regardless. They're just going to build it that way. And I was like, hallelujah, because that's the kind of stuff I like, that we can push it. You might not be developers. You might not be in an area of your business where you're kind of saying, I can have an influence, but you can, because you just need to ask the questions internally and say, what are you doing about that? Because it's really important.
100%. It's so important, that, I think, but also as well, another thing to add to it with the standards and everything like that, most brands and businesses are aligning themselves to the Sustainable Development Growth Goals. There's 17 of them. You just need to remind them of SDG 10. Because SDG 10 talks about inequalities and actually talks about accessibility, and sort of basically that you cannot leave anybody out in anything you do. So if a business is happy to promote the fact that they're aligning their business with those growth goals, you can just remind them of SDG 10 and say, okay, that's really good. So when you decide to make your event non-accessible, you know that's not going along with SDG 10. And you just put that on your website, didn't you? And you put that in your press release. I think it's important to use those elements because they'll jump on that. Yeah.
So we've got about 5 minutes left. I'm really glad we've been answering your questions all the way through. I'm going to try and get through a couple more of these. Do you think we need an ILA for accessibility and inclusion? And by that, in case anyone doesn't know what that means, ILA is an amazing company run by Anna, who's fantastic, and she developed Trace alongside some partners. And Trace is a tracking tool for sustainability particularly. And I've said in quite a few of my recent speaking sessions, sustainability is getting to that point. I have to caveat this, sustainability is broad, and we think about, so we'll talk about green, we'll talk about the carbon side of sustainability. We're starting to get to that point where we can track it, measure it, and report against it, and it's becoming a bit clearer. It's not there yet, but it's better. When it comes to accessibility and inclusion, tracking, measuring, reporting on, do we need that kind of level for this area? What do you think, Jen?
I think we do, yeah. I was thinking about that when you were talking about, during the session. Why don't we have that? I think the problem that we would have is very difficult to capture everything and everyone and make sure everyone feels like they're included. It gets to that point where you start thinking it's very difficult to cover everyone, and so then you start thinking, oh God, have I missed someone? Who have I missed? Because it's so wide, because it touches everything. There's touch points across the whole event life cycle. So it is difficult, but again, it comes back to that. We have to start somewhere. So yes, we do need that, and I'm sure when Anna kicked off Isla, she was probably thinking, God, this is a huge task, but now look where they are. So if we don't, I hear this, if not now, then when? So should we not just get on with it?
Yeah.
I'm not taking it on, but I'm happy. I would love to be a part of it, but yeah, I think that's a massive job. Who's brave enough?
I like that. Should we just do another question? I was going to say something, but we'll do another question. Okay, in your opinion, how can we be more inclusive in networking at events? Ryan, any thoughts?
I think it's just making sure that you understand your audience and who you're catering for, making sure that it is inclusive and accessible for all, going through that checklist to make sure that anyone can turn up, anyone can engage, anyone can experience that. And with the networking events, you possibly sometimes need to be a bit vocal of what it is that you want, but also using tech and looking at those different things. I think it's really important to just really engage with the opportunities that are out there with some great businesses that can help to drive this.
Yeah, I was going to say technology because that is what I would answer. Just because I know when people have their mobile apps and they can see who's there, some people are quite shy just to go up to people and say, hi, my name's so-and-so. But if you can just see on the app, oh, look, there's a lady here from X company. Maybe I might like to go and talk to her. I know with our app, you can say, hey, would you like to meet? And then that person can accept and say, yes, I would like to meet. And then that breaks down the need for you to just look foolish,
I think it's difficult. You've got to think about how are you setting up your tech. Like on an app, is that very easy for someone who's visually impaired to be scrolling through and looking at everyone's tiny little picture and be clicking on them and then being able to send that message, and how do they come back? Have you got someone on site who can sit at a one-on-one desk and be delivering that, and they've got slots available so that they can come up and say, I really want to meet with these people, but I'm too nervous to go and send them a message on the app, or I can't use the app because it's too small and my phone's not working like that.
I think that's a really important thing, and we just need to do that in everyday life. That's music to my ears, because I just sort of think that's what you need. You need that individual that can act as your accessibility person, the person that is so in tune with disability on all its areas. But the first thing you're going to get with that is that costs. But I think it's the most important.
How much does that cost? I've done that before, and you just got to be that person there saying, I'm here, come and talk to me. And you might not have anyone come and talk to you all day, but just to that one person that you've spent 5 minutes with.
It costs because it's that person needs to be trained.
Time.
Yeah, and that person needs to be trained. They need to know all of it. And I think if businesses and organisations had that person that could be that representation to support that individual, because that is 9 times out of 10 with the person with a disability, is that they feel like nobody understands them. And that comes up in all surveys that go out to the disability community. I feel like no one understands me or is knowledgeable of my needs. So I think a simple solution is that you have that individual that understands it and can deliver it.
Well, thank you so much. We tried to rapid fire through some of those last questions. I think if we were going to leave you with anything, I like this, that we came back round to the investment. We came back round to it might cost something, but the long-term win and the long-term benefit is going to yield so much more revenue than what you've spent. And someone asked me the other day at an event, how do I convince my seniors? How do I convince the bosses and the board? And I said, show them the bottom line, because I hate to say it, but it does come down to money for lots of organisations. That's what we're in business for. And being inclusive and accessible actually helps businesses to function. And even though it might seem like a hindrance in the first instance, the long term is you bring everybody along with you on that journey and you all go together. So did you want to add one more thing?
I was just going to say 13 trillion. I mean, how much easier is that? That's what that expenditure of a person with a disability has. That whole consumer is 13 trillion. Why would you not want to go into that market?
Absolutely. So land on that. 13 trillion. Yes, please. So thank you so much to the panel. Thank you, audience, for being very vocal on your questions. I really like that. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Event Tech Live. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Felicia, Ryan and Jen. That was an amazing session, and you can tell by the amount of questions coming in how much people want to learn about this subject as well. So absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.